we talked to a lot of people about the advantages of eating lots of meat. We've even talked to people like Sally Norton, who talks about the harms of oxalates, and that can be found in a lot of plant foods. But I'm really excited to chat with you as the plant-free MD to talk really truly about the harms of eating plants and have like a really comprehensive, kind of a guide as to why plants, are so prevalent in our diets and why maybe they should or shouldn't be. But I would just like to talk about your story and how you first came across this. You came across this quite a while ago, understanding that the plants really are not that great for us. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, and that's my approach to this as well, and that's why I call my podcast the Plant-Free MD, because it's not just about eating meat. That's obviously a big part of it, but the main thing is not eating all these other things that actually cause harm. So when I was first talking to people about this, they would say, oh yeah, that's really interesting, yeah, that makes sense, but I don't mind eating salad, so I'll just keep eating salad. And the point is, it's not that you don't have to eat salads, you don't have to eat vegetables to get all your nutrition from, because you can get all your nutrition from meat, which is true. But in fact, you don't want to eat the salad. The salad is actually bad for you. So it's not just like, oh, hey, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. It's like you shouldn't do it. The reason being, yeah, exactly. The reason being is that, plants are living organisms, and they want to stay living organisms. All living things have a defense down to single-celled organisms. And while animals can run away or fight back, plants can't. And so they have to use different means to defend themselves against predation. They have all sorts of different ways of doing that, which are very, very interesting. But one of the main ones is that they just use poisons. They are just toxic to animals and insects. Caffeine was developed as an insecticide, and it's actually, a neurotoxin, and can cause seizures in people that are prone to epilepsy. So, these things actually do cause harm to us, and they're supposed to. Plants don't want to be eaten by and large. Obviously, there are exceptions in symbiotic relationships with certain animal species, but that's how these things have developed. And so some people say, well, like, oh, this plant doesn't want to be eaten, so it uses poison. It's like, oh, but that cow doesn't want to be eaten either. Oh, shush, that doesn't meet with the narrative. I saw some guy say that specifically. Well, the point is that the cow can defend itself as well. It just has different defenses because it's mobile, because it can use kinetic defenses. It doesn't need to be poisonous. Its flesh doesn't have to be poisonous to the lion that eats it, where a eucalyptus leaf does. So I learned in seventh or eighth grade biology that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them, so that they can survive and thrive, or else they go extinct, which most species of life have gone extinct at this point. So everything that's come through the gauntlet of evolution is battle hardened, including the plants. And then animals, also evolving to and adapting to being able to break down specific poisons safely so that they can eat a specific plant. And then other things can't eat that. So that's their conserved resource. They don't have to compete for resources as much, like, pandas, koalas, giraffes, and everything else. These things eat plants, but they eat very specific plants because they can eat that plant. It's safe to eat that plant. They eat other plants, they'll die. People know this. This is common knowledge. Almost every plant on Earth is, quote unquote, inedible, meaning that it will kill you if you eat a small amount of it. Well, then we have edible plants. The only distinction there is that they don't kill you very quickly, but that doesn't mean that they don't use poisons. That doesn't mean that they don't use toxins. They do. It's just that we have some inbuilt defenses to these things, but we don't have immunities. It's not like cows and grass, where a cow can eat, and there's different kinds of grasses, and some cows can't, and cows can't eat certain kinds of grasses. So when you're eating your evolved plant, then you can do that. But if your species hasn't evolved to eat a specific plant, that plant is bad for you. So, we learn this, we actually teach this to kids, and people say, oh, why don't we know this? Or maybe they call bullshit on it. You ask anybody who studied botany, even taken one class on it, they'll be like, oh yeah, actually, that's true. Study horticulture, one class on horticulture. Oh yeah, no, that's actually true. All plants, use some form of toxin. That is a rule across the plant and fungus kingdoms. Just period. That is hard fact. That is hard science. Like, that's really not up for debate. That is a thing that exists in nature. And just because someone doesn't know that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means they need to read more. And I encourage everyone to do that. Just go to an introductory botany book. It is there. Okay. Study, take a book on horticulture. It's there. So when I was in college at the University of Washington, I was taking cancer biology. I always knew I wanted to be a doctor, and I was always interested in those sorts of classes. So I was taking cancer biology, and we were sort of going back over this, the fact that plants use poisons, to stop predation, to deter predation. And this is a cancer biology class. So we were looking at it from a cancer perspective. And so we were looking at the different amount of carcinogens that were in, plants that we would eat on a regular basis. And we learned that, like Brussels sprouts, like the most reviled vegetable of all from all kids, there's a good reason for that. They had, at the time, we had already discovered 136 separate human carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts. And mushrooms had over 100. Spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, you name it, everything we were given a list, literally page after page, of all the different plants that you've ever eaten. And every single one, there wasn't a single one that had less than 60 carcinogens in it. And so this is where that bitter taste comes from. This is why kids hate the taste of vegetables, when they're first eating solids, because they're much more closely attuned to their genetics. And so that bad taste, that's a very good indication that there's something bad there for you. A bitter taste, a bad taste, that is your brain and tongue are sophisticated machines. And that is their way of telling you there is something bad in there for you, bad in there. So if something is bitter, it is bad for you, right? This is why medicine's bitter. Well, what is medicine? Medicine is a poison that just causes more benefit than harm in certain circumstances. But just like you're not going to take antibiotics every single day, you shouldn't eat, broccoli or celery or whatever every single day. Maybe there's some medicinal purposes for that, but maybe not. But whether or not they do, those medicinal purposes are only of a net benefit when you're sick and when you're unwell, and that's treating you for something. So we were quite blown away by this. Obviously, as I think everyone I tell that to is just like, that can't be real. I thought the same thing. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? I thought it must be joking. He must just be screwing with us. Everyone was literally looking around wildly, like, what's going on? Like, who's in on the joke? I was looking for like a TA somewhere in the back of the class that's just sitting there like smirking, like, he does this all the time. There was no one. And it slowly sort of dawned on us that, like, Jesus, this guy's serious. And, and I remember like just thinking in my head, I was like, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And he just looked at us and he's just like, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I was like, right, screw plants. And I just stopped eating them right away. And I went to the store. Everything was a plant. Everything had plant product. Everything had some sort of product in it that came from plants, be it, grains or seeds or vegetables or fruit, sugar, obviously. Everything came from a plant. And so I just ended up just getting eggs, meat, and milk, because those were the only things I could find that didn't have plants. And so I ended up inadvertently becoming a carnivore for several years, at least 5. And I was playing, professional rugby at the time. I was traveling all over the US and Canada and then internationally. And I was just, most of that time I was a pure carnivore, and I just never felt better. And I've never performed better, and I've never played better. And I've never had such, exercise tolerance. And I've never been able to push myself so hard. I've never recovered so fast, except until now, when I'm doing it again, and my body does the same thing. I'm 20 years older and I feel just as good, and I don't have the time anymore to dedicate like I did before. I was training, sometimes anywhere from 6 to even 10 hours a day, every day. And so I was getting in absolutely insane shape. I don't have the time for that anymore. But when I do, I can push myself much further than I could before, and I recover nearly instantly, and I get much more benefit out of that. So that was my introduction to it. And then when I was in England playing, I just didn't have the same access to food. I don't know why, but the steaks, I couldn't get them to brown in England. I just couldn't do it. I don't know if they had a higher water content or something, but like they only went gray on the outside. And then I just kept cooking them until they browned, but they never browned. And so I ended up cooking these things well done. And I just, wasn't having fun with it. And then so I just couldn't figure out how the hell to cook a damn steak there. I don't know. I'm sure it was me, but like there was something going wrong. And so I ended up getting meat that was already cooked, and that seemed to be easier just because I was, was playing all the time and training all the time. I just didn't have time to mess around. And some of the times that meat would be breaded, like breaded chicken drumsticks. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, it's a plant, but is it that much? Does it make that much of a difference? I'm like, well, let's just see. It did. It made a big difference. I remember a couple of months into it, I was getting aches and pains and little, niggling sores and just little weird injuries. And I was like, oh, I don't, what the hell's going on? And I just wasn't, I didn't have the same energy that I had. I didn't have that same just like gusto for, exercise that I had before. And I remember thinking, I was like, what's the difference? Like, what's going on? Am I just not pushing myself? Am I not training as hard? Like, what am I doing? Or I was 25 at the time. So I was like, is that it? Is just 25? That's the crest. And then you're just going downhill after that, which is certainly what I thought when I was 21, 22. My friends would be like, oh yeah, I'm 25. So I'm still young. Still doing this. I'm like, dude, you're dying. Like, what are you talking about? And then, so I'm 25. I'm like, shit, am I dying? It's like, is that it? But looking back, that was when I unknowingly switched off of a carnivore diet and started eating these plants again. Several years ago, I came across more solid information that humans actually are carnivores. That's the kind of animal that we are. And we're taught this. We're taught that we're apex predators, top of the food chain. What animal do you know of at the top of the food chain that eats anything except animals below it on the food chain? Can't think of a single thing. Sharks and dolphins don't eat kelp, for roughage. Lions don't, enjoy a fresh garden salad every now and then. They just don't. And so, we're the same. And so when we step off of that, when we stop eating our naturally evolved, biologically appropriate species specific diet, which is meat, that's when we run into troubles. And so all of a sudden, everything just I had this epiphany. All of a sudden I started looking at medicine from that perspective, that humans are animals, and the kind of animal that we are a carnivore. And we're a carnivore that are not eating and living as carnivores. And this is where you start seeing this breakdown in health. And it's a sort of a poison exposure relationship. When we get exposed to these poisons in these plants, especially in abundance, we end up developing different diseases like heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, and even Alzheimer's and autoimmune, like autism, like neurodevelopmental delays as well. And these have all been linked to diet, and some have causative links as well, such as autism. So, this is a very, very important part of medicine. I think it's really the most important part, because it's something so easy that you can just eliminate this huge swaths of so-called disease, because they're not diseases, they're poisonings. We're being poisoned, and we're not getting enough of our appropriate nutrition. And that's sort of my approach to all this, is getting people the right species specific food, which is fatty meat. And the fat is very important. It's one of the most important parts that people are still afraid of, though they shouldn't be. It does not cause heart disease. It does not cause diabetes. It does not cause obesity. It just doesn't. And so getting people back on that, and then specifically eliminating the different things that are harmful to them.